Hello everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final part of our series on the basics of economics. Let's finish this thing up with one of the most important subjects in all economics: unemployment. Remember the foundational principles of economics. Resources are limited and desires are unlimited. But if that's the case, why is there ever unemployment? Shouldn't anyone be able to find a job helping someone fulfill some of their unmet desires? Why should anyone ever go without work? So let's start with the definition of unemployment, and this is the very same definition our government uses to collect unemployment statistics. Someone who is unemployed is currently not working, but is both willing and able to work for pay and is actively searching for work. And they use this to find the ratio of unemployed workers to the total labor force, both employed and unemployed. That ratio is the unemployment rate. Already we have an issue here. Someone who has given up looking for work because they're discouraged, even though they would love to have a job or even need one desperately, doesn't get counted as unemployed. Unemployment is usually used as a measure of economic misery, yet the ones who are the most miserable don't get counted at all. A much better metric is the labor force participation rate. This is the total number of employed people compared to the entire available labor force, generally people between ages 16 and 65. But even then, it's problematic. If someone manages to get a part-time job just to help squeak by, he's considered employed. But even then, it's problematic. If someone manages to get a part-time job just to help squeak by, he's considered employed, even though he's not employed full-time in a career. The unemployment statistics don't distinguish between the two. So let's look at the two types of unemployment. You have voluntary unemployment and involuntary unemployment. What? I hear you cry. What's voluntary unemployment? Why would anyone want to be unemployed? It's a good question. Why would anyone want to be unemployed? Well, what happens when you change jobs? That's called frictional unemployment. It's when someone says, "Take this job and shove it. I can do better." So you quit your job. You go and find a better job. But in that little interim where you're changing jobs, if the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls you up and asks you about your current working conditions, you say, "Well, I'm not working at a job and I'm looking for a job." You're counted as unemployed. Another way this can happen is if you're a contractor. So if you're, say, a carpenter, you go to different firms to get contract work. Let's say one day you're building a house. One day you're building an office building. One day you're building a deck for someone, for all these different companies. But at the end of each contract, it might take you a little while to get the next job. And if, during that time, the BLS calls you up, you say, "Well, I currently don't have work, and I'm looking for work." Again, frictional unemployment. It's just part of the game when you're a contractor. The third thing that causes voluntary unemployment is changing industries. The quintessential example here is that when cars started becoming more and more popular, the people who made buggy whips didn't have as much business. So their industry went away, and then they had to pick up and go somewhere else and do something else. Economists call that creative destruction, and we wouldn't have any human progress without it. This voluntary unemployment is a good thing for the economy. It helps progress. It helps labor resources be used as efficiently as possible. It gives employers the incentive to have good working conditions and good worker morale. It's a good thing. It's the involuntary unemployment that people are concerned about, and that's mostly what people think about when you say unemployment. Now, we're not just talking about people losing their jobs or being laid off or whatever. That sort of thing happens all the time. We're looking at this economy-wide, the total number of people who do not have work and who are looking for work, but not because of voluntary unemployment. And this can happen for a number of different reasons. Involuntary unemployment can be divided into two types: perpetual unemployment and cyclical unemployment. Perpetual unemployment pretty much stays the same, or may gradually go up or gradually go down or whatever. But cyclical unemployment goes in cycles. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. Perpetual unemployment is probably the biggest thing to be concerned about. One of the big things that causes perpetual unemployment is wages being artificially set too high. We saw this in Part 4 with the minimum wage. The government sets the minimum wage above the equilibrium level, That's the definition of the wage being too high, the wage is set above the equilibrium, and this results in perpetual unemployment. In fact, most perpetual unemployment is due to government, not only with the minimum wage, but with various different regulations. Regulations made with the best of intentions. For example, as a business, you must provide insurance to your employees, and the insurance plans have to cover this and that and everything else, and they get really weird a lot of times and require things like chiropractic and acupuncture to be covered, which causes the price of the insurance plan to go up. Now, if a lot of us had our choices, we'd get cheaper insurance that didn't cover all that extra stuff we neither need nor want. But we don't have that choice. And what that does is raises the effective amount that you're paid. It doesn't show up that way in your paycheck, but since those benefits tend to have a higher cost than the employee might otherwise be willing to pay on his own, it gets overpriced, and effectively it's the same thing. The cost of employment gets too high, and you end up with this perpetual unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is when unemployment goes in cycles. This is usually because of the business cycle, and it's all based on total production. We ramp up, and we get the total production high, and we've got an economic boom going on. Unemployment is low, but then production goes too high. It goes above the level that can be sustained in the long run. This could be due to government subsidies making parts and supplies appear cheaper. It could be due to artificially low interest rates, making it appear there's more demand than there really is. But one way or another, there either aren't enough resources to sustain the supply, or there isn't enough demand to sustain this level of output. Sooner or later, it all hits the fan. The bubble bursts, you get lots of unemployment, and that's the economy's way of correcting itself, of gearing it back up again. So in the recent housing bubble, too many people were building too many houses. When that couldn't be sustained, the bubble burst, which meant that people had to stop building houses and start doing other things, going to where they were actually needed in the economy, where they can do the most good. This happens every so often. The Fed just keeps putting money into the system, artificially driving down interest rates, and we get this boom going on and, yay! Happy days are here again! Well, what's really happening is that the new money being injected tends to make things overvalued. That's what happened in 1929. The stock market was overvalued because of the Fed putting new money in. Investors had all this money to buy stocks with, but the new money wasn't tied to any sort of increased productivity. It was just the Fed printing up new money. When the Fed started worrying about inflation, they panicked and hit the brakes on the money supply. The bubble burst, everything crashed, and the rest is history. In a free market, everyone should be voluntary players. All prices should be allowed to seek equilibrium where everyone who's willing to work for a certain wage should be able to find a job at that wage. And there are enough goods and services produced for everyone who wants to buy all of the things these employees are producing at the price they're selling for. It's not sexy, it doesn't give you all these nice big numbers on Wall Street, but it's the only way to do it that's sustainable in the long run. Unfortunately, one of the consistent truths of government is that helping usually hurts. Even things like health and safety regulations have unintended consequences. When you're employed by a firm, of course you only get your wage and your benefits, but they've got all this other stuff they have to do just to comply with government regulations, simply because they hired you. So that way overvalues your job. With voluntary unemployment, you get greater productivity. With involuntary unemployment, you get less productivity, and there's also a big cost to society. It leads to more poverty, which leads to more welfare, which means the taxes have to be increased. If taxes are increased, your take-home pay is reduced, which means the reward for work is reduced, and guess what? That leads to more unemployment. It's a vicious cycle, and it's unsustainable. And the more it happens, the worse things get. Well, now I think we should talk for a minute about things that do not cause unemployment. A lot of people think they do, and one is new technology. How many times have you heard people claim that robots will take all of our jobs? There's still today kind of neo-Luddites who are saying that all of the technology is taking their jobs, but that's not really what's happening. What's happening is that the person who was having this job screwing a bolt into a car door or whatever, that represents a labor resource that is now freed up and can be used more productively. By having the robots screw in the bolts, you free up labor resources and it's easier to make more cars. The price of cars goes down, the number of cars being sold goes up, and if anything, it will result in greater employment. Not just a lower level of unemployment, but the quality of those jobs that people have will go up. Think about farming. In the US, at the start of the 19th century, most people were farmers. Then mechanization kept taking over. Did that take jobs away? Well, we're not working on farms anymore, but we are building cars and making iPhones and building computer networks. Mechanization of farms freed up those labor resources so we could do other things. If we still had to work on the farms, we wouldn't even have iPhones or computers or many of the other things we have today that help us live longer, healthier, and happier lives. Remember our basic foundational principles. Resources are limited, desires are unlimited. So no matter how many robots there will always be unmet desires that labor resources can help fulfill. And if there does end up being some sort of science fiction scenario where robots have all the jobs, it could only be because all of our desires are being met, which means that no one has to work and we're all happy, healthy, well-fed, and have nice roofs over our head. That would be the best of all possible worlds. Another thing that does not cause unemployment is immigration. So you have an immigrant who comes in and does the job for minimum wage when you're being paid $3 over minimum wage. And people say that crowds out the employment for everyone else. Well, it really doesn't. And the people who think that are running afoul of lesson 1 again. Why? Because these immigrants don't just represent workers, they're also consumers in the economy. They get money. They're going to buy food with that money. They're going to buy clothes with that money. They're going to have to buy a place to stay with that money. It all increases wealth in the economy. But what about illegal immigrants who work for less than minimum wage? In reality, those illegal immigrants are doing jobs that wouldn't exist at all without them because those jobs were destroyed by the minimum wage. So if they're working for a job that you lost, don't blame them, blame the minimum wage and the politicians who passed it. So that's unemployment, and that's our 5-part series on the economy. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it enlightening. Above all, I hope you see why a basic understanding of economics is crucial to the well-being of everyone. If so, you'll understand that the best way to help the poor, the best way to improve the economy, and the best way to get the best quality of life for yourselves and everyone else in your country is to set people free to engage in voluntary transactions however they want.